Okay. Good to see everybody today. I'll say this at the end also. Most likely we will not have class next Sunday because my brother-in-law's father died yesterday. This is my wife's sister's husband's father, who we're very close to, and they live in Queens. And the funeral is going to be in Florida in the middle of the week, and then they're going up to Queens to sit Shiva. So I think I'm going on Sunday, up and back the same day, taking my mother-in-law for a Shiva visit. So I have to leave at like 9 o'clock in the morning for that journey. So no class next Sunday, most likely, but I'll know for sure in a day or two. Okay, so Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we're at this red S, and the topic of the Mishnah was presumptive ownership and how long one would be on land or using a dovecote or other things like that. How long do you have to use it for you to be considered a presumptive owner? And the Mishnah comes up with 3 years. The discussion is why 3 years, why not 2, why not 4, why not 5, whatever. And it's based on the discussion says it's based on the topic of the goring ox. And I had explained last time what a goring ox is, and that an ox has to be considered a goring ox, like in that category or in the status of a goring ox, the ox will have had to have gored someone or some 3 different people on 3 different occasions. And then it becomes in the status of not just an ox, but this is a dangerous ox, an ox to stay away from. So because that was 3 and not 2 times and not 4 times, there's something about 3. So the rabbi suggests that also 3 years is presumptive ownership. 3 being the key number. Okay, so that's where we're up to. Rav Huna says the 3 years that the sages said are required to establish the presumption of ownership is referring to when he worked and profited from the field in consecutive years. The Gemara asks, right? So in other words, it can't be, I used the field in 2020, then I used it in 2022, then I used it in 2024. No, that doesn't count. It has to be 2020, 21, 22. So 3 years in a row. The Gemara asks, what is Rav Huna teaching us with this statement? We learned this in the Mishnah. Their presumption of ownership is established by use for a duration of 3 years from day to day, right? So the Mishnah itself says it has to be continual use. The Gemara answers, lest you say that the phrase from day to day serves to exclude partial years and to teach that each of the 3 years must be full and actually even scattered, that is, non-consecutive years are sufficient. Therefore, let me do that sentence again. The Gemara answers, lest you say that the phrase from day to day serves to exclude partial years and to teach that each of the 3 years must be full and actually even scattered, that is, non-consecutive years are sufficient. Therefore, Rav Huna teaches us that the years must be consecutive. So the Mishnah might not necessarily have us learn definitively they are consecutive years. So that's why we need Rav Huna's statement to clarify any kind of ambiguity. Rav Chama says, And Rav Huna concedes with regard to locations where they leave fields to lie fallow by planting in alternate years, that the 3 years combine despite not being consecutive, as that is the manner in which owners profit from the land. Okay, but so Chama is clarifying Huna's clarification to say, well, if you're letting the land lie fallow just for the betterment of the land, well, that's using it also, and that's the natural way of using the land, so then it doesn't have to be consecutive. The Gemara asks, isn't it obvious that this is the halacha? The Gemara answers, no. It is necessary to state this with regard to locations where there are some people who leave the fields to lie fallow, and there are some people who do not leave the fields to lie fallow, and this man left the field to lie fallow. All right, so we need this teaching in a place where it's not everybody has the same farming practice. Lest you say that the claimant can say to him, if it is so that the land is yours, you should have sown it. Therefore, Rav Chama teaches us that the possessor can say to the claimant, I am not able to hire someone to guard one parcel of land within an entire field, and I acted like those who own other land in this location and let the field lie fallow. And alternatively, the possessor can say to the claimant, in this manner of farming, it's beneficial for me to farm because the land produces more later, and I don't wish to plant year after year and weaken the soil. The Gemara clarifies Rav Huna's statement that the presumption of ownership can be established only by consecutive use. We learned in the Mishnah about the presumptive ownership of houses. But with regard to the use of houses, where the witnesses attesting to its use know who uses the house only in the day, but they don't know who uses the house in the night, how then can one establish the presumption of ownership in the case of a house? The possessor's use is not consecutive, as it's continually interrupted by the nights. Abaye said, so that, in other words, this is before the era of street lights, so it might not be necessarily clear that the person who's using the house during the day is using the house at night. So then it is also not consecutive, because you can only prove the days. Abaye said, who testifies about houses? Neighbors. And neighbors know who's inside in the day and in the night. So yeah, Abaye's right. Neighbors are pretty nosy, and they know who's in the house and how long they're in the house for. Rava said that there's another scenario in which one can bring witnesses with regard to the use of the house. This is such as when two people come and say, we rented the house from him and we lived in it for 3 years in the day and in the night. This testimony substantiates that the house was used under the authority of the one who is attempting to prove that he has established a presumption of ownership. Okay, so that's another way to prove it. Just want to see in the note if there's anything worth seeing. No, it gets into complicated back and forth. Okay, Rav Yamar said to Rav Ashi, how can their testimony be relied upon? That is, bringing witnesses. These witnesses are biased in their testimony, because if they do not say this testimony that they rented the house from the possessor for 3 consecutive years, we say to them, go and give payment for the rental of the house to that one who is claiming ownership, as the one you paid has not established that he is the true owner.
Jonah?
Yes, Bess.
Is it the use of the land where they are worried about overusing the land and maybe rotation of crops?
Right.
How long has this been known? I thought it was a fairly recent.
Oh, no. Letting the land lie fallow is a known thing. It might even be the basis for the sabbatical year. So definitely, it's a 3,000-year practice that somehow the ancients knew to let the land lie fallow or to rotate crops in the same field because there is some benefit to the crops and to the land. Okay, Rav Ashi said to him, low-level judges rule this way. In other words, only a court composed of ignorant judges would accept the testimony of the renters of the house in a case where they are biased in their testimony. Nevertheless, Rava's scenario is still possible, as we are not dealing with a case where they are holding the money for the payment for the rental of the house, and they are saying to the court, to whom shall we give it? Therefore, they are not biased in their testimony because they will pay the same amount regardless of who the actual owner is. Okay, so it's not like the renters, yeah, so that's the renters want to know who the owner of the land is. They're not saying that they're the owners. So in this case, this is a viable case to bring before the court. The Gemara quotes a related statement. Mar Zutra said, and if the claimant claims and says, let two witnesses come to testify for the possessor that he lived in the house 3 years in the day and in the night, his claim is a legitimate claim. So that's Mar Zutra saying that. And Mar Zutra concedes with regard to peddlers who travel through cities, during which time others might live in their houses, that even though the claimant does not claim that he insists on testimony that there was continuous use day and night over 3 years, we, the court, claim this for him. Since people know they are traveling salesmen, it's more likely that people lived in their houses without permission and without their knowledge, right? So people know who owns a house. People know what the owner does for a living. People will make sure that the authorities know that the person who's squatting is that a squatter and not actually one who has the right to possess the house, in this case of a traveling salesman. With regard to the requirement for continuous day and night use to establish a presumption of ownership, the Gemara comments, and Rav Huna concedes with regard to a store in the town of Machoza, that's a town in Babylonia, which is generally used in the day and is not generally used in the night, that one is not required to use it in the night to establish the presumption of ownership. Okay, so a house that's used as a store doesn't need to have nighttime possession because stores are open only during daylight. So that's a slight difference in a house. So a house that's used for living has to have day and night possession, whereas a house used for a store doesn't need nighttime. With regard to the requirement of continuous use to establish a presumption of ownership, the Gemara relates that Rami Bar Chama and Rav Ukva Bar Chama purchased a maidservant together. One sage made use of her during the 1st, 3rd, and 5th years, and one sage made use of her during the 2nd, 4th, and 6th years. That is, till the sabbatical year where a slave has to go free. One individual who contested their ownership of the maidservant emerged and claimed that he was the owner. They came before Rava for judgment. He said to them, what is the reason you acted like this, making use of her in alternate years, so that each of you would not establish a presumption of ownership concerning each other by making use of her for 3 consecutive years? Just as this usage does not establish a presumption of ownership with regard to you, it does not establish a presumption of ownership with regard to others. That is the claimant in this case as well. The Gemara adds, and we said this only in a case where it was not written in a document that they are partners and are dividing the use. But if it was written in a document, the document generates publicity, that they own the maidservant as partners rather than individually, and they can jointly establish the presumption of ownership. So when you have written documents, the documents get published somewhere so people know about the situation. It's like those ads you see in the back of the Jewish Week or other newspapers, like the pages and pages of legal claims or something like that. So people People can say, well, it was published in a newspaper. The Gemara continues its discussion of the requirement for full use of land to establish a presumption of ownership. Rava says, if one worked and profited for 3 years from all of the land except for the area required for sowing a quarter kav of seed, which he did not use, he acquires all of the field based on the presumptive ownership except for that Beit Rova, that area of the land. Rav Huna, son of Rav Yehoshua, says, and we said this ruling only where that Beit Rova is suitable for planting. But if it's not suitable for planting, he acquires it by means of the acquisition of the rest of the land. So it depends why he's leaving that corner of the field empty or not using it. If he's not using it because it's not suitable, then it becomes part of the rest of the field. And just because he can't use it doesn't mean he doesn't own it, as opposed to someone intentionally not using it. Rav Bevai Bar Abaye objects to this. If that is so, how could one acquire an area that is only rock by establishing the presumption of ownership, as one does not plant rocky land? Rather, the presumption of ownership can be established by standing animals on it or spreading produce on it. Here, too, he should be required to stand animals on the Beit Rovah or to spread produce on it. If he did not profit from this small piece of land at all, he has not established a presumption of ownership with regard to it and acquires only the rest of the field. So you have to use all of the land for whatever purpose you can come up with. You can't just leave it be.
What is spreading produce? What's the purpose?
Maybe to let it dry, or
Yeah,
maybe to sell it. You spread it out so people can see what you got for sale. Could be something like that. Okay, now the red S, the Gemara relates that there was a certain person who said to another, what do you want? That is, what are you doing with this house of mine? The other said to him, I purchased it from you, and I worked and profited from it for the years necessary for establishing the presumption of ownership. The claimant said to him, I was among the distant settlements and was unaware that you were residing in my house, which is why I did not lodge a protest. So the one residing in the house came before Rav Nachman for a judgment. Rav Nachman said to him, go clarify your profiting. That is, prove that you really resided there for 3 years, and then the case can be judged. Rava said to Rav Nachman, is this the correct judgment? The halacha is that the burden of proof rests upon the claimant. Therefore, the one who is attempting to take the house from the possessor should have to prove that the other did not reside in the house. And the Gemara raises a contradiction between this statement of Rava and another statement of Rava, and it raises a contradiction between this statement of Rav Nachman and another statement of Rav Nachman. As there was a certain person who said to another, I am hereby selling you all of the property that I own of the house of Bar Sisin. There was a certain parcel of land that was called of the house of Bar Sisin. The seller said to the buyer, this parcel of land that I own is not actually of the house of Bar Sisin, and is merely called of the house of Bar Sisin, and it's not included in the sale. They came before Rav Nachman, so you see it's complicated, or confusing. They came before Rav Nachman for judgment, and he established the land in the possession of the buyer. Rava said to Rav Nachman, is this the halacha? Isn't the halacha that the burden of proof rests upon the claimant, and the land should remain in the possession of the seller? The Gemara continues, there's a difficulty from one statement of Rava to another statement of Rava, and there's also a difficulty of one statement of Rav Nachman to another statement of Rav Nachman. As in the first case, where the claimant states that he had been in a distant location, Rav Nachman ruled in favor of the claimant, and Rava ruled in favor of the possessor. While in the second case, that of the property of Bar Sisin, their opinions were reversed. The Gemara answers, the contradiction between one statement of Rava and another statement of Rava is not difficult, because there, in the case of the property of Bar Sisin, the seller had been established as having the land in his property, which is why Rava rules in his favor. But here, in the case where the claimant states that he had been in a distant location, the buyer is established as having the house in his property. The contradiction between one statement of Rav Nachman and the other statement of Rav Nachman is not difficult as well, because there, since the seller said to him, I'm hereby selling you all of the property that I own of the house of Bar Sisin, and this parcel of land is called of the house of Bar Sisin, it's incumbent on him to reveal that the parcel under dispute is not of the house of Bar Sisin. But here, in the case where the claimant states that he had been in a distant location, it should not be any different from a case where the possessor is holding a document as evidence that he purchased the house. Wouldn't we then say to him, first ratify your document and only then be established in the property? In this case as well, since his presumptive ownership is in place of a document, he needs to clarify the matter by means of witnesses. There was a certain person who said to another, what do you want with this house of mine? The possessor said to him, I purchased it from you, and I worked and profited from it for the years necessary for establishing the presumption of ownership. The claimant said to him, I was in the outer marketplaces and was unaware that you were residing in my house, and therefore did not lodge a protest, so your profiting does not establish a presumption of ownership. The possessor said to him, but I have witnesses that every year you would come here for 30 days and had an opportunity to know that I was residing in your house and to lodge a protest. The claimant said to him, I was occupied with my business in the marketplaces for those 30 days. Rava said, a person is apt
Am I
to
the only one who's having problems?
What,
No.
what's the
Oh,
matter?
okay.
What,
No,
what's the matter?
You're it going in and out.
Oh, I see.
Mostly out.
Huh. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Huh.
I can.
I only had just something just come up, said my internet connection is unstable, but it looks like I'm connected
Okay.
with full bars.
Oops.
So you still hear me
Slipping.
okay? You still hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
You
So
slipped out.
I slipped out again. Well, I can try switching. The so hold on a second. It's gonna. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes? Yes?
yes,
Okay, so we'll try this. So, should I start this paragraph over? There was a certain person?
No, I think that from the possessor said to him. Is that where we lost you?
Well, let me start the paragraph over because this is the case. There's a certain person who said to another, what do you want with this house of mine? The possessor said to him, I purchased it from you and I worked and profited from it for the years necessary for establishing the presumption of ownership. The claimant said to him, I was in the outer marketplaces and was unaware that you were residing in my house, and therefore did not lodge a protest. So your profiting does not establish a presumption of ownership. In other words, I was away at different marketplaces. I had no idea that you were in my house. So you can't claim that I had knowledge of it or that I agreed to it. The possessor said to him, but I have witnesses that every year you would come here for 30 days and had an opportunity to know that I was residing in your house and to lodge a protest. The claimant said to him, I was occupied with my business in the marketplaces for those 30 days. Rava said, a person is apt to be occupied with business in the marketplace for all of 30 days and accepted his claim. So in other words, that the claim of I was busy in the marketplace was accepted by Rava. There was a certain person who said to another, what do you want with this land of mine? The possessor said to him, I purchased it from so-and-so, who told me that he purchased it from you. The claimant said to him, don't you concede that this land is formally mine and that you did not purchase it from me? Go away, I'm not legally answerable to you. Rava said, the claimant stated the halacha to the possessor, as this is a legitimate claim, and Rava accepted his claim. There was a certain person who said to another, what do you want with this land of mine? The possessor said to him, I purchased it from so-and-so, and then I worked and profited from it for the years necessary for establishing the presumption of ownership. The claimant said to him, so-and-so is a robber who robbed me of the field, and he did not have the authority to sell it to you. The possessor said to him, but I have witnesses that I came and consulted with you, and you said to me, go purchase the land, indicating that you conceded that he had the authority to sell it. The claimant said to him, the reason that I advised you to purchase it was because the second person, that is you, the possessor, is amenable to me, while the first, that is the purported thief, is more difficult than he. That is, I prefer to litigate with you rather than him. Rava said the claimant stated the halacha to the possessor, and this is a legitimate claim, and Rava accepted his claim. The Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion is Rava's statement? Is it in accordance with the opinion of Admon? As we learned in a Mishnah, in Ketubot, with regard to one who contests ownership of a field, claiming that a field possessed by someone else actually belongs to him, and the claimant himself is signed as a witness on the bill of sale of the field to that other person, Admon says his signature does not disprove his claim of ownership of the property, as it is possible that the claimant said to himself, the second person is amenable to me to deal with, as I can reason with him, while the first owner, who sold the field to the current possessor, is more difficult to deal with than he. And the rabbis say he lost his right to contest, as he signed a bill of sale that states that the field belongs to the possessor. Rava's ruling appears to be in accordance with the individual opinion of Admon and not with the opinion of the rabbis. So all these different cases and claims, and Rava, and what Rava has to say about it. The Gemara explains, you may even say that Rava's ruling is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. There, in the case of the Mishnah in Tractate Ketubot, by signing the bill of sale, the claimant performed an action indicating that the field was not his for the benefit of the possessor of the field. But here, in Rava's case, there was no action, only speech. And a person is apt to casually say statements, and he does not lose his right by virtue of this. Yes, okay, best is just a joke. There was a certain person who said to another, what do you want with this land of mine? The possessor said to him, I purchased it from so-and-so, and then I worked and profited from it for the years necessary for establishing the presumption of ownership. The claimant said to him, so-and-so is a robber who robbed me of the field, and he did not have the authority to sell it to you. The possessor said to him, but I have witnesses that you came to me at night, and you said to me, sell it to me, indicating that it's not your land, as if it were yours. You would have demanded that I return it without your paying for it. The claimant said to him, I said to myself, let me purchase the benefit of avoiding my litigation in order to reclaim my land. Rava said, a person is apt to pay money to purchase the benefit of avoiding his litigation. So that, in other words, Rava agrees that some people might want to pay money to avoid going to court. There was a certain person who said to another, what do you want from this land of mine? The possessor said to him, I purchased it from so-and-so, and then I worked and profited from it for the years necessary for establishing the presumption of ownership, indicating that he possessed it for 3 years, as this is the minimum number of years required for establishing the presumption of ownership. The claimant said to him, but I'm holding a document stating that I purchased it from that seller 4 years ago. Therefore, if it was sold to you 3 years ago, as you claim, he did not have the authority to sell it at the time. The possessor said to him, do you maintain that when I said I profited from the land for the years necessary for establishing the presumption of ownership, that I was saying I worked and profited from the land for precisely 3 years? What I actually was saying was that I worked and profited from the land for many years, and thereby established a presumption of ownership. Since my purchase predated yours, it was effective. Rava said, it's common for people to refer to many years as years necessary for establishing the presumption of ownership, and his claim is accepted. Right? So people don't speak in legalese and in exact language. The Gemara comments, and this matter applies only if he profited from the land for 7 years, so that presumptive ownership of this possessor preceded the document of that claimant. But if he profited from the land for only 6 years, so that the sale to the claimant took place before the years necessary for establishing the presumption of ownership were completed, you can have no greater protest than this, that the purported seller then sold the land to another. By doing so, he indicated that he does not concede that the possessor was the rightful owner, and the possessor should have been careful to hold on to his bill of sale for even longer than 3 years.
Jonah,
Yes, Bess?
there is what the seventh year it has to lie fallow. He's not farming it for 7 years. He is farming it for
He's in possession of it for 7 years.
Okay, got it, I think.
Yeah. There was an incident where two people disputed the ownership of land. This one says the land belonged to my ancestors and I inherited it from them. And that one says that the land belonged to my ancestors and I inherited it from them. This one brings witnesses that the land belonged to his ancestors, and that one brings witnesses that he currently possesses the land and that he worked and profited from the land for the years necessary for establishing the presumption of ownership. Okay, so one has witnesses that yes, his claim is right, that it had been owned by his ancestors, and the other only has witnesses to claim that he's been working it for 3 years. Rava said the judgment is in favor of the possessor due to the legal principle that if the judgment would have been decided in one's favor had he advanced a certain claim, and he instead advanced a different claim that leads to the same ruling, he has credibility, as why would he lie and state this claim? If the possessor wanted to lie, he could have said to the claimant, I purchased the land from you, and I worked and profited from it for the years necessary for establishing the presumption of ownership, in which case he would have been awarded the land. Abaye said to Rabbah, we do not say the principle of why would I lie in a case where there are witnesses contradicting his current claim, as they testify that the land belonged to the ancestors of the claimant. Therefore, he should not be awarded the land. The possessor then said to the claimant, yes, it's true that it had belonged to your ancestors, but I purchased it from you. And by stating that which I said to you, it belonged to my ancestors, I merely meant that I rely upon my own ownership of it as if it belonged to my ancestors, as I purchased it and then profited from it for the years necessary for establishing the presumption of ownership. The Gemara asks, can he state a claim and return and state a modified version of his claim? Or can he not state a claim and return and state a modified version of his claim? Ula said he can state a claim and return and state a modified version of his claim. The sages of Nehardea say, it's another community in Babylonia, he cannot state a claim and return and state a modified version of his claim. Once you make a claim, that's the claim. You can't modify it. The Gemara clarifies their respective opinions. And Ula concedes that in a case where he had initially said to him, the land belonged to my ancestors and did not belong to your ancestors, that he cannot state a claim and return and state a modified version of his claim, as Ula allows the litigant only to reinterpret his initial claim, not to replace it with a contradictory claim. And Ula also concedes that in a case where he was standing in court and did not state a particular claim, and he later came in from outside and back into the court, and he stated that claim, that he cannot return and state that claim. What's the reason for this? It's because it's apparent that these claims of his were taught to him by someone after he left the court, like he was getting some advice. And the sages of Nehardea concede that in a case where the litigant who changed his claim said to the other litigant that when he had initially claimed the land belonged to my ancestors, he had actually meant it belonged to my ancestors who purchased it from your ancestors, that he can state a claim and return and state a modified version of his claim, as this serves only to clarify and not negate his initial claim. And the sages of Nehardea also concede that in a case where he discussed the matter outside of the court and did not state a particular claim, and then he came into the court and stated that claim, that he can return and state that claim. What's the reason for this? Because a person is apt not to reveal his claims except to the court. Amemar said, I am from Nehardea, but I nevertheless hold that a litigant can state a claim and return and state a modified version of his claim. The Gemara concludes, and the halacha is that a litigant can state a claim and return and state a modified version of his claim. Okay, I have to stop here because there's some things that I have to do related to my father before my 10:30 meeting that I have. So we'll stop here for today. And like I said at the beginning, most likely we will not have class next Sunday because I'm going to have to travel back and forth to New York that day for a shiva call to my brother-in-law. So our next class then will be, okay, so February 15th is President's Weekend, but I'm assuming people are around, so I think we can, even though there's no Hebrew school, I think we can have class that day. So hopefully I'll see you again on February 15th. Okay? All right. Have a good day, everybody. Take care.
Good week.
Thank you.
Thank you.